In this lesson, we will prepare a file of tasks and insert them. Then, with shared activities enabled, we will use the task relation object to associate multiple contacts to a single task using Data Loader. Let's kick this lesson off with a refresher on Salesforce activities. A task is a specific type of record within the broader activities framework. A task is an action that needs to be completed, such as a to-do item, a phone call, or an email, typically associated to another record like a contact or an opportunity. Also within the activities framework are events, which have a defined start and end time and show up on the calendar. We'll cover events in a separate lesson. Tasks, comparatively, do not have a start or end time. They have a due date and a status and are meant to be completed. When preparing to load task records, a required field is the status. The closed checkbox can be applied to one or more status values, and when a task is assigned a status with the closed behavior, it will transition automatically from the open activities list to the activity history list in the user interface. In the UI, tasks with a status that is not marked as closed will appear in the record's upcoming and overdue activity section. Closed tasks appear below in the historical activity section. While closed is not its own field, its behavior as a filter in reports and list views helps to easily differentiate between open and closed tasks rather than relying solely on the status values that are marked as closed. Another feature of tasks is the priority field. You don't have to include this field in your file for an insert to be successful. Just know that if you do not specify a value, the default value of the pick list will be applied. Tasks can be related to a contact or lead in the name field, and most other objects in the related to field. The name and related to fields are polymorphic, which are special fields that can reference multiple types of objects. While name is a field label that is visible in the user interface, its API name is whoID. The second field, related to, is the field label with the API name of whatID. An example of how these are used is to create a task to schedule a meeting and set the whoID to John Smith's contact record and the whatID to John Smith's account called ABC Corp. This ensures that the task shows up not only on John Smith's contact record, but also against ABC Corp's account record. We can make loading tasks even more exciting by enabling shared activities. This is a feature that, when enabled, allows you to relate a single task to up to 50 contacts. By the way, you can't relate multiple contacts to a recurring task series. We cover recurring tasks in depth in a separate lesson. To enable shared activities, search for activity settings in Setup and check the box beside Allow users to relate multiple contacts to tasks and events. Go ahead and do this step in your dev org as we'll practice inserting shared activities toward the end of the lesson. This is the object that allows us to create task relationships. We can link one lead up to 50 contacts or one whatID record to a single task. Since we're able to insert tasks with the whatID and the whoID defined during the initial insert, why would we ever need to insert records into the task relation object? Well, many databases include the whatID and whoID in the activity table already, but sometimes you'll receive a database where the tasks are in a separate table from the task relationships. To support this structure, you'll insert the tasks first and leave the whatID and the whoID fields blank. Next, you'll insert the task relationships to associate the related records. Task relation has 3 fields, the first of which is the task ID. You can either use the Salesforce task ID or set Data Loader Step 2b to reference the task's legacy ID field. The second field is called Relation ID. This is the related record that you are associating to the task. You can also use Step 2b in Data Loader to reference the legacy ID if you're linking only one object's worth of IDs in your file. However, if your file's Relation ID field contains a mix of objects, you will either need to split the file into separate files per object so that you can reference the legacy IDs on each, or you can bring in the Salesforce record IDs for all the related records and insert the file once. The third field on the task relation object is called isWhat, which is a checkbox field that will be false on all contact and lead relations and true on anything else. If you ever want to export a list of all the who relationships, look for the table named Task Who Relation in Data Loader when you choose the export function. Now that you understand the guts of how these task relationships are loaded, let's look at how the UI is altered when shared activities is enabled. Here you can see how many contacts can be related to a task. On this screen, you can see that only one contact can be related to the task. This is in an org where shared activities is not enabled. Now that we have thoroughly covered shared activities, let's move on to another field on the task that can accept more than one type of record. While not technically considered polymorphic, the owner ID can reference a user or a queue. Assigned to is the field label. Owner ID is the API name. When shared activities are enabled, a third option appears in this field named Groups. This is referring to public groups. Public groups have the same 00G prefix as queues. When assigning a task to a public group, the task is visible to all members of the group, but it is not individually assigned to a specific user responsible for completing the task. The primary differentiation lies in how you train your users to use these. Typically, you'll assign a task to a group when there's existing collaboration and shared responsibility. You'll assign a task to a queue when there's a process. You'll assign tasks to a queue when the business process requires managing unowned tasks that need to be claimed. The next feature of tasks to understand before inserting them is the reminder functionality. To set a task reminder during data migration, there are two fields to consider: is reminder set and reminder date time. If is reminder set is true, a reminder is set for the task at the date time in the reminder date time field. If is reminder set is false, no reminder is set and the reminder date time field is ignored. During migrations, you will typically set is reminder set to false so that you don't overwhelm users with task reminder alerts. Ensure enable user control over task assignment notifications is checked so that users who have disabled notifications do not receive them. Another best practice is to make sure users have temporarily disabled task notifications in their personal settings before the migration. And to truly cover your bases, you can turn off email deliverability completely during the migration. Some notifications are suppressed by default when you enable bulk API and data loader, which also reduces the chances of alerts being triggered. If you have custom field data to include in your task load, such as the legacy ID, you'll create these custom fields in the activity object of the object manager. These fields will then be accessible on both task and event inserts. The type field on the task is not visible in field level security by default. If you're planning on migrating data into this field, make sure that you've gone to its field level security and provided the necessary access. If task record types are applicable in your org, you'll create them on the task object, and they are not applicable to the event object. If record types are enabled and you do not specify a record type in your file, the assigned user's default record type will apply. Let's go through the process of inserting tasks and task relationships using our task workbook. The first tab, called Task Fields, includes all of the native fields on the task object. It has the API field name, the label, and a helpful description. The Task Relation fields and the Task Who Relation fields tabs contain information about those object fields. The tab called Tasks includes raw data like you might receive from another source database. The Tasks Map tab includes the original header ID from the source data, as well as, in row 2, how we would map that into Salesforce in our mapping file. In some situations, we do have the ability to access the legacy ID field in Data Loader Step 2B when we're referencing a single object. So for example, with the owner and the created by user, since we're referencing the user object only, and we've populated the legacy ID fields on that object, we can use that information to map in the owner ID and the created by ID instead of having to use VLOOKUP, for example, to bring in the corresponding Salesforce user ID information. When that gets to be a little bit more tricky is when we have more than one object referenced in a lookup field. For example, in our data set, we only have account records in our what ID column. But if we had accounts, opportunities, cases, and other types of records, we can only set one object at a time in Data Loader Step 2B. So we'd either have to import multiple task files and relate to the legacy ID field of a different object each time, or we have to prepare our data by bringing in the Salesforce record ID based on each legacy ID in the file. Remember that the created date time has to be in a specific format, which you'll find on the Excel formatting tab of the workbook. Once we've inserted our tasks, we're then going to create our task relations. This is the functionality that we have available to us since we've already enabled shared activities, and we can relate all of these contacts to a single task record. Let's get started by loading our tasks. I've already created a tasks prepped CSV file. I'm going to click Insert, select the task object, select my prepped file, click Next, and in my source file for the created by, the related object is user, and I'm going to reference the legacy ID field. I'm going to do the same thing for the owner by selecting the user object and referencing the legacy ID. I'm able to reference the account related object for the what ID and use the legacy ID field. For the who ID, I only have related contacts, So I can set that object and reference the legacy ID field. When I click Next and I click Create or Edit My Map, I can see that pretty much everything mapped except for task status, which is by design. Because remember, when Data Loader completes an insert, it gives us a Data Loader status, which overwrites any values in another column already named status. Everything else looks good, so I'll click OK. Make sure I've selected the correct output folder. I have 99 inserts that were successful and 0 errors. Let's take a look at one of our related account records here and double check that our activities came in as expected. We can see that we have 1 overdue task and 1 completed task. If we click into task 1, we can see the information about the task migrated as expected. Step 2 is going to be to insert our task relationships. Our source file contained the task legacy ID, so we'll set up Data Loader to reference the legacy ID field on the task object. We don't need to use VLOOKUP to bring in the Salesforce task ID. We do want to do a single insert of relationships, and because there's more than one object, there's contacts and leads referenced, we won't be able to use Data Loader Step 2B to reference the legacy ID information. So we have put an X in front of these headers to say we're not going to bring these in. And instead, we're going to map directly to the relation ID field, which contains the Salesforce record IDs. Our third map field is called isWhat, which is false on all of our records that are leads and contacts. If we were inserting relationships to any other object, the value would be true. Let's go back into Data Loader, click Insert, Show All Objects, and start typing task relation. Here we'll select our task relation prepped file, click Next. Hit OK. We are going to reference on the task object the legacy ID field. We are not going to reference the related object legacy ID field. Here we can see that our auto mapping worked as expected. We'll click Next, validate our output folder, and click Finish. Let's take a look at our success and error files. Let's take a look at one of our newly created relationships from our success file. Let's search for a task based on its legacy ID. In our task record, we can see that there's 1 person plus 18 others referenced on a single task. We can click the pencil beside the name field and we can see all of the contacts that are related to this single task record. This is a good example of a successful relation insert. Let's take a look at our error file. What this error is telling us is that we can't create a task relation of a lead when the task already has a relation to the lead or the contact. This task relation insert errored out because this task already has the who ID populated. We can't add additional leads to it, only additional contacts. Now it's your turn. Enable shared activities in your DevOrg. Use that task success file to create a task relation CSV file and insert those into the task relation object. And then go back into Salesforce and check your work. Make sure that the relationships that you intended to create are created. Up next, events.